want you guys to think back into your life. Think back into your rich history of life that you've lived so far. And I want you to think back to a turning point in your life. A moment that like changed everything or that signified like a rite of passage or something like that. Think about a pivotal turning point moment in your life and turn to the person next to you and tell them about it. You got 10 seconds. Go. All right, who's got a fun one? Can you what? That's fine. I'll let you go and then you. Okay, so when Wyatt got into his accident, that was a big turning point. Okay. Yeah, that changes family dynamics. Mine's not appropriate now because it's not that deep or like. All right, okay. Interesting. Losing your cousin. Oh man, I'm sorry. That's tough. That'd be a turning point for sure.
A fan page made for me on Instagram. Please go follow it. It's Jack0n_Clement fan page.
Okay, got another fan page. Okay. Your great grandma dying, is that what you said? Okay, that'll be a turning point. Who else has got a turn? That went serious really fast. But I mean, that's okay. What else? Okay, so baseball stats. Your baseball career took a turning point for the better. Okay. Anybody else want to share? You don't have to. I can move on. Okay. Your first child was born. Oh, everybody look at Elena and go, oh. I'm such a blessing. All right. So I want you to think back to your very first day of high school. Actually, think back to the night before your very first day of high school. Some of you don't have to think back that far. Some of you, you've been here a while, so you slept a little since then maybe. So you got to think about that a little. But think to right before you're about to start high school. How many of you, like, they're on a scale of like 1 being incredibly anxious and afraid, and 10 being like, this is going to be the best thing ever? How many of you were like on the 1 side of things, like anxious? Okay? How many of you were on the like 10, like this is going to be great, I'm done with middle school kind of side of things? Okay? How many of you were somewhere in the middle? A little bit of both. You got the butterflies in the belly that are like, I'm going to fly away. The flutters. See what I did there? So, that's a turning point, right? Like, for me, high school really wasn't that much of a turning point from 8th grade because I grew up where K through 12th grade was all in the same building, so it wasn't that big of a deal for me, but I know for a lot of people that's really scary because you're moving buildings. Sometimes some of you're put back in the same building with people that you haven't seen since elementary school because you went, like, some of you go to high school and you're like, this is nothing cool, nothing different. I'm already ready to graduate. Some of you go to high school and you're like, I could just be here forever. How many of you are like, high school is the dream, I could be here forever? All of you. Oh, great. Okay, yeah. Yeah, nobody's raising their hand. That's because there's some turning points are great, some are not. How many would say high school is better than middle school, though? Okay, there's really everybody raising their hands. Okay, so there are turning points. Sometimes you have good turning points, some of you mentioned, but another one would be like getting your first job, getting a paycheck, having some dough to spend on yourself. Maybe you made the varsity team, or you made like first chair, or you got the role. You know, those are pointed moments. Maybe for some of you, it's a shift in the family that was really good. Maybe sometimes you've had turning points that aren't so great. Some of you talked about some of those, like maybe a relative that died or an accident. You know, those are turning points that, you know, especially in the moment, don't seem very great, and it's kind of sometimes hard to process. Maybe you were like me when I was a freshman in high school. My dad was job hunting, and so there was a turning point in our family where the dynamic really shifted. And so Maybe you've gone through other turning points that were more of a defining moment in your life because it was bad, not because it was good. And so the question, as we've been going throughout the series, is how to have an interactive faith that is authentic and that carries some weight, some meaning, and has an impact on your life and makes you a better person, rather than a counterfeit faith, which is just a copy of other Christians you know, but isn't actually real, hasn't taken root for yourself. That's what we've been talking about this whole series, and we've talked about all the different ways that you can make your faith authentically yours, as opposed to just being a counterfeit. And so we've talked about, last week we talked about how serving is one of the things that can really grow your faith and make it more authentic for you, and which, by the way, we have lots of areas that you can serve in if you want to get involved somewhere here at the church. We've talked about how you need people, you need community, and people will help you grow your faith. We've talked about how you literally just getting to know God better will help grow your faith. Spend time in His Word, spend time in prayer. And this week we're talking about turning points. We're talking about those moments in life, good or bad, that can really shape your faith. And specifically, we're going to lean towards the bad side of turning points, because life, if you think about it, it's like you've heard the phrase, life is a journey, right? You're going on this journey, but life is never a straight line, okay? When you're going throughout life, it's never just as planned. It's never like it's supposed to look on paper. It always has its ups and downs. Things are good for a while. Sometimes things are bad. Sometimes you loop back around. You feel like you're living Groundhog Day with Bill Murray over and over and over again, because you're going back to the same scenes that you've seen over and over again. Same mistakes, same relational mishaps, same sin, same struggles, same addictions, same whatever. And it seems like you're just in the cycle of life that's not progressing forward on the journey you want to be on. Sometimes things just feel like they stop. Maybe it's that turning point that hits you in the gut and you're like, this isn't real. This can't be real. What do I do? Sometimes things are awesome and you feel like you're going full blast. Sometimes it's like the day before high school and you've made it to the top of the roller coaster and it's about to just launch down and you're about to be on the ride of your life. How many of you have you done those Oculus things? Like where it's like, I tried one for the first time and there's a roller coaster thing and it's trippy. Like you kind of have to sit down, otherwise you fall over. At least if you're like me. So it's fun though. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But you know what I'm saying. Sometimes life has its ebbs and its flows. It has its ups and downs. It has things that are exciting, things that aren't. And we wish that line was a straight line of just progress all the time. But life's journey is never just a straight line. It's never simple. It's never always the way we picture it. It's a journey. And it's got bumps on the way as well. So one of the things that I think, if we're going to understand how turning points can be used in a good way, even when it's a bad turning point, when you hit that fork in the road where it's like, maybe it's a T in the road. That's a better analogy, where all of a sudden you can't keep going. You have to turn one way or another. You can turn a way that will pull you away from God, or you can turn towards God when you hit that crossing, when you hit that T in the road, when it's like, I don't know what to do, right? It's that turning point that hits you and you don't know what's going to happen. We're going to look into a passage right now where I think we get a pretty clear idea that's real. It's not us like putting on a fake Christian emotion to pretend we're okay with things that we're not. But it also balances that tension with, I still have faith in the midst of what's happening. And so in order to do this, we're going to go to one of the parts of Jesus' life and Jesus' ministry that John writes, and John was one of Jesus' closest apostles. He outlives all the other disciples from what we can tell into his probably 80s or 90s. He wrote the book of Revelation around, most people think that it's around the late 80s or early 90s AD, which would make him 80 or 90. And so, but he's recounting, he's in exile on the island of Patmos, and that's where he dies because he was exiled for his faith. But it was near the end of his life when he's writing his gospel. And he recounts the story of Jesus, and he talks about some of the people that were closest to Jesus. You guys know there was his disciples that were closest to him, but there were also people that weren't his disciples that were also close with him, that journeyed with him, that did ministry with him, that were friends with him. And some of those were a family of siblings named Mary, Martha, and their brother Lazarus. And in John chapter 11, we get a pretty interesting picture of how we can learn kind of what to do with these turning points. And what we find is that, well, I'll just read it because it'll just be easier that way. John chapter 11, verse 1. This is the very beginning of the chapter. This is setting the stage for what we're going to talk about. It says, "Now a man named Lazarus was sick. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha." Now these three, Lazarus, Mary, and Martha, they're not just, like I said, random people. They're close friends of Jesus. And so the sisters sent word to Jesus, right? Meaning, hey, we have a need. Let's send word to Jesus because our brother, his friend, is sick. "Lord, the one you love is sick." And they don't even recognize, notice they don't even say his name. They say the one you love is sick. Meaning that this implies friendship. They don't have to say the name. Jesus knows who they're talking about. And so, if we were to read on, Jesus, knowing that his friend was sick, he dropped what he was doing, he dropped his ministry, he stopped in the middle of his sermon to come and go and heal his friend Lazarus, and everything was great, and they all lived happily ever after. Except that's not what happened. Jesus actually, the text says, he delayed going. He finished what he was doing. He didn't just drop what he was doing to go and help his friend, which is what you would expect him to do in this situation. He finishes what he's doing. He delays his trip a few days, and then he comes. Well, Mary and Martha, they've been around Jesus in his ministry. They show up a few times in the Gospels, and they've seen Jesus heal people. They've seen Jesus heal strangers, no less. So surely, when their brother, his friend, one of the dudes that he's really close to, the one he loves, if he had just, actually meant something with their friendship, then he would have come and dropped everything and certainly healed him since he was so accustomed to healing these random strangers on the road. Well, it's not what happens. And so by the time Jesus actually gets there, we're confronted with, I think, one of the most profound verses that comes from the Gospels that's not of Jesus. Like, Jesus doesn't say this, but I think it's one of the most profound verses that's not what Jesus said. And this is what happens. Jesus arrives, and here Martha comes up to him, and she says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Now, before I go on and read the second, in verse 22, you have to recognize, and I think we have to stop and appreciate the honesty there. Because when you've been confronted with that turning point, when you've been hit with that moment that makes you question reality, when maybe some of you haven't had this moment yet, but you will, because that's life, unfortunately. We live in a fallen world. And just to clarify, God does not cause bad things to happen to you just to grow your faith, because he likes to torture you that way. We live in a fallen world, which means sin is rampant, which means there's death, which means there's hard times that fall on everybody. And it's not necessarily in relation to how good or bad you are as a person, right? So, knowing that and clarifying that, she goes, "Okay, Jesus, I've seen you heal people. I know and I believe that you are who you say you are, that you're the Son of God, that you're the promised Messiah. If you had been here, you could have done something about this. Instead, you delayed. For whatever reason, you didn't show up for your friend. You didn't show up for me." And most of us, when we come to that point in our lives, it's like, makes you question everything. If we're honest, we fall on one of two scenarios. We either turn our backs against God because, "God, I know you could have done something and you didn't, and I'm holding it against you." Or we go the other route and we basically pretend everything's fine because we're good Christians and we know we can't be mad at God. So whatever, God's got it in his hands, but deep down you haven't actually processed or wrestled or grappled with those feelings. And so that's why I think this is so profound, because it communicates something that's incredibly important for us as we live out our Christian lives, as we encounter turning points in our lives, and we have to know how to deal with that. She says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." And she says it to his face. She says, "I know if you had been here, things could have been different. I know you had the power to change things." But then she finishes it in verse 22, and she says, "But I know that even now, God will give you whatever you ask." In other words, she says, basically, I'm mad at you, but I trust you. I'm mad at you. I don't understand. I'm frustrated. I wish things would have happened different. I don't understand what you're doing. It doesn't make any sense to me. But I trust that you know what you're doing. I trust that you're still God. I trust that you see the bigger picture. And I trust you with the outcome. And I think often we think that we've got to choose one thing or the other. Like either we're mad and we walk away from faith, or we just become a pushover and our faith becomes a crutch that we don't actually process our feelings. And I think it's okay to have both. Where you go, I don't get this, and it frustrates me, but I trust you. And that's what she demonstrates here, and I think that's so key. That's what turning points do for us. They can sharpen our focus. They get our attention. Turning points will get your attention. And they can either make or break your faith. So when it comes to how to moving your faith from a counterfeit faith, that's just kind of a copy of other Christians you've seen, to becoming a faith that is actually your own, that's rooted in some experience, that's rooted in some actual relational equity with your Creator, then you gotta recognize that sometimes God uses those turning points to sharpen us, to get our attention. Doesn't mean He caused it, but we can allow it to bring us as close or far from God as we want it. And that choice is kind of on us. But check out what Jesus says next. Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." In other words, like we would think of like, well, yeah, I'll see him in heaven, sure, but thanks, right? But Jesus says, no, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? In other words, he goes, you're missing the point. There's actually a bigger hope here that I'm trying to communicate with you. But what's crazy, I'll get there in a second. "Yes, Lord," she replied, "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God who has come into the world." Right? She believes, she trusts in Jesus. But what's crazy is oftentimes I feel like we see Jesus, we have this picture of He's always setting us straight. He's always saying these wise things. He's always like giving us this profound message of what we should or should not do or how to think about God. But He's not just this like emotionless, perfect person that you can't relate with. Because in the next verse we'll read, it's one of the shortest verses in the entire Bible, but it's also one of the most profound. It's 2 words. And it's something that we should recognize when we think about our Creator, when we think about the God who loves us. Jesus wept. In other words, he knew what the outcome was going to be, but He does not rejoice in our pain. He's not this stoic moral teacher that just says, it's okay. If you believe in me, you'll never die even though you die. Really confusing, wise saying. Jesus, right? And then move on. He's a feeler. He experienced His life. He experienced hurt of His own, right? He experienced that kind of stuff. I love how the author of Hebrews says He's not unable to sympathize with our weakness. He knows what it's like to be human because He was. And He wept. Then the Jews said, "See how He loved him." He's not just a heartless, stoic, moral teacher trying to set you straight. He deeply cares, and Jesus gets our pain. It's not just a fun detail. It's opening the window into God's heart, and the way He feels about us, and the way He processes our pain with us. When a turning point gets our attention, we will always find Jesus in the middle of it with us. He will never leave us or abandon us. And so that's one of the reasons that we can trust in the midst of hard times. And so then Jesus just, does something crazy. He looks up and He says, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When He had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." Right? The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." So Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. But then here's the story, how the story ends. It says, therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him. So Jesus could have just not delayed. He could have gotten there and healed Lazarus before he died, like he did with those random strangers earlier in the Gospels. But he doesn't. And he decides to mourn with them. And then he performs this miracle to prove that he is who he says he is. But what you need to recognize, if we're to kind of take that story out and put it into modern day living, the moral of the story would be that when we choose to have faith in the midst of life's hardest turning points, it not only has the ability to grow our faith, but it has the ability to grow the faith of those around us. Because as Christians, we mourn differently, we grieve differently, we process pain and hurt and suffering differently, because we have a hope that transcends all that. We have an outlook on life that knows none of this is permanent. All of this world will fade away eventually. And we know that. And so, while yes, it's okay to grieve and mourn, and it's still just as painful when we lose people, when we encounter hard times, we know it's not the end. And we grieve differently than the rest of the world. We have a hope that is different. And that faith can change those around us. See, it is possible to come and go through the toughest pain possible and come through it trusting God more. And being able to do that will give you a testimony that can change the lives of others as well. And again, God doesn't just thrust hard times on us for that purpose only, but if we allow Him to, He will use those situations to do something that we would have previously thought impossible in our own lives and in the lives of those around us. So, just kind of in closing, when you do encounter hard times, when you're going throughout life's journey and you hit those bumps on the road, you go through the loop and return in the cycle, you go down and you go up. When you hit that turning point in your life and it forces you to take a step back and kind of check everything, check, what do I believe? What is this that I even, what am I doing with my life? When you're in those moments, I want you to ask yourself these two questions. One, where is God in this? Okay? Because often God is in a place reaching out to us and trying to get our attention, and we can be so clouded by our frustration and our lack of control that we miss Him altogether. We could be looking for Him in the wrong places, but He is there. He cares. He is there feeling our pain with us. He weeps with us. He suffers with us. But He's there. So where is He? Look, maybe it's in the conversation that you would have with a small group leader as you process the conversation, or a friend, as you process what you feel. Maybe He's there in the text that you get that encourages you. Maybe He's there in a song that comes on your radio. Or maybe He's just there on the road as you just go outside your front door and take a walk to just process things. But Jesus is there. So where is He in the midst of that situation? 2, how can this tough situation help my faith grow? Again, turning points will either make or break our faith. It will either cause us to grow our roots even deeper, or it will cause us to wither and fall away. So, the choice is up to you. How can the tough situation help your faith grow? And if you look for that, then I'm not saying you'll fully understand everything, because no one can guarantee that, but you will be able to make peace with it, and God's going to be able to do some things that you did not think was possible. And it's a pretty incredible thing to get to experience. So because God can use turning points to grow our faith, we should have our faith in God and be ready and prepared for those turning points when they come. He can use them to turn us into the people that He's molding us to be. So I encourage you, if you're going through something, I encourage you to talk about it. Use your small group time. Talk about it, process it out loud. Have people that pray for you and that knows what's going on, that can know the real you, so they're not getting to know counterfeit you. Because counterfeit you will only become more counterfeit as you grow, unless you decide to be authentic. Unless you decide to just be the real you and share what's really going on. So I encourage you that if you're going through something, talk about it with people that you could trust and that are on the same life path as you, that want to honor God with their lives. And that would be my encouragement to you. If you're not going through anything tough, great. Rejoice. You don't have anything hard going on right now. Be preparing. And also be an encouragement to those who are going through things that are less fortunate than yourself. Sometimes you don't need to come to church for you. You need to come to church for the people around you. You need to come to church to build up the church. Sometimes we get caught in the cycle where we choose whether or not we're going to do something based on what we'll get out of it, but we don't think about what we could put into it, what we could grow, and what we could build. And so that'd be my encouragement for you. God can use turning points to grow your faith. How that happens is really up to you, how open you decide to be with God and with His church. So that's all I got for you guys tonight. I hope that as you guys go throughout this week, you feel encouraged. You recognize you're not alone when you're going through hard stuff, because we all ask the hard questions, especially when hard times happen. So know that you've got a community here that cares about you. You know that you have adults here that care deeply about you, that pray for you, that think about you when you're gone, that see you. And so I hope that you find refreshment and hope in not only this room, but in the community that then leaves this room as you go throughout your week. So let me pray, and then you guys got about half an hour to spend with your groups, and then we'll be done.